The woman stepped out of a brand-new luxury SUV, looked at the 6 engines lying on the trailer behind her, and said, "They are nothing but scrap." The quiet single dad wiped the grease from his hands, glanced at the faded serial numbers for barely 2 seconds, and silently wondered why anyone would throw away something history had never truly replaced. The cool morning air carried the familiar scent of motor oil and fresh-cut grass through Sullivan Restoration Garage, a small family-owned repair shop tucked beside an old county highway just outside Columbus, Ohio. Sunlight filtered through tall maple trees, casting long shadows across rows of restored engines, weathered tool cabinets, and shelves filled with carefully labeled parts collected over decades. Every bolt, every wrench, and every faded service manual had its place, because Jack Sullivan believed that respect for craftsmanship always began with respect for the tools that made it possible. 9-year-old Emma Sullivan sat on a wooden stool near the open garage door, finishing her homework before school, occasionally looking up with a smile whenever her father explained the purpose of another engine part resting on his workbench. She loved hearing those lessons because Jack never spoke about machines as though they were pieces of metal. To him, every engine carried the story of the people who built it, repaired it, trusted it, and depended on it. The peaceful rhythm of the morning changed when a convoy of company trucks rolled slowly into the gravel driveway. Dust drifted into the sunlight as the lead vehicle stopped beside the garage. A woman stepped out wearing a tailored navy business suit and carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to making expensive decisions without hesitation. Olivia Parker, Chief Executive Officer of Parker Industrial Systems, surveyed the modest garage with a brief glance before motioning toward the trailer behind her. 6 enormous industrial engines sat chained to the flatbed, their faded paint scarred by years of storage and neglect. Without introducing herself, she spoke to one of her employees. "Unload them." Hydraulic ramps lowered with a metallic hiss as forklifts carefully placed each silent engine onto the concrete outside Jack's workshop. Emma watched with wide eyes. "Daddy, those are huge." Jack smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Someone spent a lifetime building each one." Olivia finally turned toward him. "You own this place?" "I do." "Good. Scrap all 6 of them. Keep whatever metal has value. Send the bill to Parker Industrial Systems." Jack looked quietly across the weathered engines without touching them. Deep beneath years of rust and dust, faint markings caught his attention for only an instant before disappearing beneath another layer of grime. He asked only one question. "May I know why they are being discarded?" Olivia folded her arms confidently. "Because our engineers determined they are obsolete. They are taking up warehouse space, and storing useless equipment costs money." Jack nodded politely. "I understand." She reached into her briefcase, handed him a signed disposal authorization, and turned toward her waiting vehicle. Before leaving, she looked once more at the engines and said with complete certainty, "Trust me, there is nothing valuable left there." The convoy pulled away in a cloud of dust, leaving only silence behind. Emma walked slowly toward the nearest engine and gently brushed away a patch of dirt with her fingertips. "Daddy," she whispered, "are they really just junk?" Jack did not answer immediately. He stepped closer, studying one small hand-stamped identification plate hidden beneath decades of corrosion. His calm expression changed almost too subtly to notice. He placed his hand lightly against the cold steel and smiled the same quiet smile he wore whenever something did not make sense. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the most valuable things in the world are the ones everyone else stops looking at." Jack rested his hand on the weathered engine for another quiet moment before stepping back and covering it with a clean canvas tarp. He made no attempt to dismantle it, remove valuable metal, or begin the scrapping process described in the disposal paperwork. Instead, he carefully wrote the date on a small inspection tag and attached it to the engine with a piece of wire. Emma watched curiously from beside the workbench. "I thought the lady wanted you to scrap them." Jack smiled while wiping his hands with an old cotton shop towel. She did. Emma tilted her head. Then why are you waiting? Jack looked toward the 6 silent machines standing side by side beneath the morning sunlight. Because every machine deserves one honest look before someone decides its story is over. Emma smiled. She had heard her father say similar things ever since she was old enough to hand him wrenches from the tool cart. Sullivan Restoration Garage had never been the biggest repair shop in Ohio, but people drove hundreds of miles to visit because Jack had earned something advertisements could never buy: trust. Farmers brought tractors that larger dealerships refused to repair. Volunteer fire departments arrived with aging generators everyone else recommended replacing. Small manufacturers depended on Jack whenever discontinued equipment failed unexpectedly. He rarely promised miracles. He simply promised he would tell the truth, even when the truth meant a repair was impossible. That reputation had been passed down from his own father, who opened the garage more than 40 years earlier with little more than a toolbox, determination, and the belief that craftsmanship reflected character. Long before Jack inherited the business, he learned to identify engines by the sound they made while idling with his eyes closed. His father insisted every engine spoke a different language. Do not only listen with your ears, he often said. Listen with patience. Those lessons stayed with Jack long after his father passed away, becoming the foundation of everything he taught Emma. During quiet afternoons after school, she enjoyed organizing sockets by size, cleaning old spark plugs for recycling, and writing inventory labels in careful handwriting. Jack never pressured her to become a mechanic. He simply invited her into the world he loved, believing curiosity could never be forced. As lunchtime approached, Emma carried 2 grilled cheese sandwiches outside, while Jack slowly walked around the row of engines for a second inspection. He crouched beside the first unit, brushing away decades of dust from a heavily corroded identification plate. Most of the stamped numbers had faded, but one unusual sequence remained surprisingly clear. Jack narrowed his eyes without saying a word. He walked to the second engine, then the third. By the time he reached the 6th, the same uncommon numbering pattern appeared again beneath layers of rust. Emma noticed the thoughtful expression on his face. Did you find something? Jack answered honestly. I found something that makes me want to ask better questions. Instead of reaching for cutting torches or dismantling tools, he unlocked an old filing cabinet tucked against the back wall of the garage. Inside rested hundreds of faded maintenance manuals, engineering catalogs, handwritten notebooks, and technical journals collected by 3 generations of mechanics. Jack carefully removed one thick reference binder, placed it on his wooden workbench, and slowly turned the yellowed pages while comparing diagrams to the serial markings he had just recorded. Outside, the afternoon breeze rustled the maple leaves above the garage, carrying with it the familiar scent of warm oil and fresh-cut grass. Emma quietly watched her father study page after page without interrupting. She knew that whenever he became this silent, he was not looking for a way to make money. He was looking for the truth. And somewhere inside those forgotten engines, the truth was beginning to reveal itself. Late that afternoon, while the 6 engines rested untouched beneath clean canvas covers inside Sullivan Restoration Garage, Olivia Parker stood 30 miles away in the modern glass headquarters of Parker Industrial Systems, reviewing financial reports that covered an entire conference table. The corner office reflected everything she had built before turning 37 years old. Awards lined polished walnut shelves, framed magazine covers celebrated her leadership, and digital dashboards displayed production numbers from facilities across the country. Investors praised her discipline because she made difficult decisions quickly and rarely allowed emotion to interfere with efficiency. Every dollar saved mattered. Every unnecessary expense was eliminated. Every outdated asset eventually disappeared from the balance sheet. Those principles had transformed Parker Industrial Systems into one of the fastest-growing industrial engineering companies in the Midwest. Yet success had quietly taught Olivia another habit. She trusted spreadsheets more than stories. If a report labeled equipment obsolete, she accepted the conclusion. If engineers recommended replacement instead of restoration, she approved the budget. Her calendar left little room for second opinions because every hour already belonged to another meeting, another presentation, or another strategic decision. Earlier that morning, the disposal order for the 6 engines had occupied less than 60 seconds of her attention before she signed it and moved to the next document waiting on her desk. She believed she had solved another expensive storage problem. She never imagined she had just removed the most unusual assets her company still possessed. Back at the garage, Jack slowly continued comparing the faded serial numbers against engineering manuals published decades earlier. Page after page revealed familiar designs until one small illustration stopped him completely. He gently adjusted his reading glasses and compared the diagram to the handwritten notes he had copied from the first engine. The machining pattern matched. So did the casting marks hidden beneath years of oxidation. Emma noticed the silence growing longer. "Daddy." Jack did not answer immediately. He turned another page, then another. Finally, he closed the binder halfway and looked thoughtfully across the garage floor where the 6 engines waited beneath their protective covers. "These are asking very unusual questions," he said quietly. Emma smiled because she understood exactly what he meant. Her father always believed machines revealed their history only to people willing to listen patiently. Jack unlocked another cabinet containing old industry journals inherited from his father. Dust floated through the warm afternoon light as he carefully removed a thick reference volume documenting experimental industrial engine programs from more than 25 years earlier. Many pages had yellowed with age, but the technical photographs remained remarkably clear. One image immediately caught his attention. The prototype shown in the journal carried an identification plate positioned in exactly the same unusual location as the engines resting in his shop. Jack looked back toward the nearest machine and felt the quiet certainty every experienced craftsman recognized when scattered details suddenly formed a complete picture. Even then, he refused to jump to conclusions. He carefully photographed each serial plate, recorded every casting number, and placed the notebook beside the reference manuals instead of making a single phone call. Across town, Olivia concluded another executive meeting and instructed her assistant to schedule warehouse renovations where the engines had once been stored. The project moved forward exactly as planned. Nobody questioned the disposal order because everyone trusted the recommendation that the equipment held no remaining value. Meanwhile, inside the peaceful garage where the smell of warm steel and motor oil blended with the evening breeze drifting through the open doors, Jack gently folded the old journal closed and rested one hand against the nearest engine. "Emma," he said softly, "sometimes the biggest mistake a person can make is believing that age and value are the same thing." Emma looked at the silent machines and nodded thoughtfully. Neither of them realized that before another sunrise arrived, people from Parker Industrial Systems would begin searching desperately for the very engines they had confidently abandoned. The following morning began with the familiar sound of birds settling in the maple trees outside Sullivan Restoration Garage, while sunlight stretched across the gravel driveway and reflected softly from the faded chrome resting beneath the canvas covers. Jack arrived before dawn as he always did, unlocked the workshop, brewed a pot of coffee, and quietly opened the engineering journal he had left on the workbench the night before. Emma wandered into the garage a few minutes later wearing her backpack and carrying a notebook she used whenever her father taught her something new. She noticed the 6 engines remained exactly where they had been. "You still have not taken them apart," she said. Jack smiled gently. "Not until I know exactly what they are." Emma nodded with complete confidence because she had learned that patience usually revealed answers that hurry never could. Jack carefully uncovered the first engine and cleaned another small section around the identification plate using nothing more than a soft brush and a clean cloth. As years of grime slowly disappeared, another row of tiny stamped markings emerged beneath the original serial number. His expression grew thoughtful. Those markings had never appeared on production engines. They were reserved for experimental development units built long before public release. Jack quietly compared the newly exposed codes against the old journal, then reached for another reference manual inherited from his father. Several pages later, he found a short paragraph describing 6 prototype industrial engines created during an ambitious research program that had quietly disappeared after budget reductions decades earlier. Only 6 had ever been assembled. Only 6 had ever completed testing. Jack looked back toward the engines resting inside his garage and slowly exhaled. "Emma," he said softly, "I think these may be far more important than anyone realizes." Emma stepped closer without touching the machine. "Should we call the company?" Jack closed the manual before answering. "Not yet. First we make certain we are right." He believed assumptions had damaged enough people already. Facts deserve patience. Nearly 40 miles away, Olivia Parker entered the executive conference room expecting another routine planning session. Instead, the company's chief technology officer hurried inside, carrying several archived engineering files. His usually calm expression had disappeared. "We have a serious problem," he said. Olivia looked up immediately. "What happened?" He spread faded technical drawings across the conference table. "Our historical research division was reviewing legacy turbine programs for a government proposal. During the audit, we discovered that the original prototype archive is incomplete." Olivia frowned. "Explain." The engineer pointed toward a photograph showing 6 unfinished engines lined up inside a factory from decades earlier. These were the only physical prototypes ever built for Project Orion. The digital design files became corrupted years ago during an old server migration. We believe these engines were still in warehouse storage. Olivia's expression changed almost instantly. "They were not. I approved their disposal yesterday." The room fell silent. The engineer looked down at the paperwork before speaking carefully. "If those were the original prototypes, replacing them would be impossible. Some manufacturing techniques documented only through physical inspection no longer exist in our records." Olivia immediately turned toward her assistant. "Find the disposal contractor. I want confirmation that every engine is still intact." The assistant hurried from the room. Back at the garage, Jack finished documenting every casting mark and quietly covered the engines once more. He locked the reference manuals inside his cabinet before walking Emma to the front of the property where her school bus had just arrived. As she climbed aboard, she smiled and waved. "You always say the truth shows up when people are ready to see it." Jack smiled back. "That is because the truth never gets lost." As the school bus disappeared around the bend, a black luxury sedan turned off the highway several miles away, heading towards Sullivan Restoration Garage much faster than anyone inside Parker Industrial Systems had expected only 24 hours earlier. The black luxury sedan rolled slowly into the gravel driveway, just as Jack finished covering the 6th engine with its protective canvas. Morning sunlight reflected from the polished paint while the tires crunched softly over loose stone before the vehicle stopped a few feet from the workshop entrance. A man in a dark business suit stepped out carrying a leather briefcase, carefully looking around the modest garage as though he had expected something much larger. Jack greeted him with the same quiet smile he offered every customer. "Good morning. How can I help you?" The visitor extended his hand politely. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I am Director of Engineering at Parker Industrial Systems." Jack returned the handshake. "Welcome." Daniel glanced toward the row of covered engines before speaking. "Yesterday, our company delivered 6 industrial engines here for disposal." Jack nodded. "They are still here." Relief briefly crossed Daniel's face. "That is very good news." He hesitated before continuing. "May I ask whether any of them have already been dismantled?" Jack shook his head. "No. Daniel let out a slow breath he did not realize he had been holding. Thank you. Jack remained calm. Would you like to see them? Together they walked across the concrete floor until Daniel stood beside the nearest engine. Jack carefully folded back one corner of the canvas. Daniel immediately recognized the casting shape and quietly lowered his eyes. I was afraid of this, he whispered. Jack noticed the change in his expression but asked no unnecessary questions. Daniel slowly circled the engines one by one, stopping each time to compare the identification plates against a printed list he carried inside his briefcase. By the time he reached the sixth engine, his face had become noticeably more serious. Every one of them is here, he said softly. Jack nodded. They have not moved since yesterday. Daniel looked at him with genuine curiosity. May I ask why you did not begin scrapping them? Jack answered honestly. Because something about them did not match the paperwork. Daniel studied him for a long moment before asking, Did you identify what they are? Jack remained careful with his words. I believe they may be prototype development units, but I have not completed my verification. Daniel smiled with quiet admiration. You reached that conclusion in less than a day? Jack shrugged gently. I reached enough of a conclusion to stop cutting them apart. Daniel looked down at the weathered engines again before speaking almost to himself. That decision may have saved years of research. Jack folded the canvas back into place. I still have disposal authorization signed by your company. Daniel nodded slowly. That paperwork is exactly why I came before making any requests. He opened his briefcase and removed several documents. Until our legal department completes ownership verification, I am not asking you to return these engines. Jack appreciated the answer. That is the proper way to handle it. Daniel smiled. Miss Parker will likely want to visit personally once she understands what these engines really represent. Jack simply nodded. She is welcome anytime. As Daniel prepared to leave, he paused beside the workshop door. May I ask one more question? Jack smiled. Of course. Daniel looked back at the silent row of machines. If you had followed the paperwork exactly as written yesterday, every one of those engines would already be gone. Jack looked toward the open highway beyond the maple trees before answering quietly. Sometimes doing the job correctly means taking enough time to ask whether the instructions themselves are correct. Daniel stood silently for several seconds before extending his hand once more. Thank you for asking that question. As the sedan disappeared down the country road, Jack returned to the workbench, opened his notebook again, and continued documenting every detail exactly as before, unaware that inside Parker Industrial Systems the emergency meeting now taking place would soon place a value on those 6 forgotten engines that no one outside the company could have imagined. By early afternoon, every conference room inside Parker Industrial Systems had been occupied. Large technical drawings covered the polished tables. Archived engineering journals lay open beside laptop computers, and senior executives spoke in unusually quiet voices as specialists compared decades-old manufacturing records with the photographs Daniel Brooks had just taken at Sullivan Restoration Garage. Olivia Parker remained standing near the windows, listening more than speaking for the first time in many months. The confidence that had guided yesterday's disposal decision had slowly given way to careful reflection. Daniel connected his tablet to the conference room display and projected close-up images of the 6 engines resting safely beneath their canvas covers. Every serial number matched the archive production records exactly. The chief technology officer adjusted his glasses before addressing the room. There is no longer any doubt. These are the original or ion development prototypes. Olivia folded her arms thoughtfully. Explain exactly why they matter. The engineer pointed toward an enlarged cross-section of the engine block displayed on the screen. When these prototypes were built nearly 3 decades ago, several critical machining techniques were documented only through physical inspection and handwritten shop notes. During a server migration many years later, portions of the digital design archive became permanently corrupted. We believe the prototype engines remained safely stored in our warehouse, so nobody realized the missing data could ever become a problem. Another engineer quietly added, without these 6 units, reproducing the original design accurately could require years of reverse engineering, and even then we could never guarantee identical performance. The room became completely silent. Olivia slowly looked from one engineer to another. What is the estimated value? The chief financial officer answered carefully. If recovering these prototypes allows us to proceed with the federal energy modernization contract currently under review, preserving them could protect opportunities valued far beyond the engines themselves. Independent analysts estimate their immediate strategic value at approximately $3 million. Olivia lowered her eyes for a brief moment. Less than 24 hours earlier, she had dismissed those same engines as worthless. She remembered the quiet mechanic asking only one respectful question before accepting her instructions without argument. He had not challenged her authority. He had simply looked more carefully than everyone else. Daniel broke the silence. There is something else you should know. Olivia looked toward him. Mr. Sullivan has not dismantled a single component. He documented every casting number, protected each engine from further corrosion, and refused to assume the disposal paperwork told the entire story. Several executives exchanged thoughtful glances. Daniel continued. He also declined to discuss ownership until our legal department completed its review. He said we should do everything the right way. Olivia quietly walked to the conference room window overlooking the company's manufacturing campus. Thousands of employees worked below, trusting leadership to make decisions that balanced efficiency with responsibility. She suddenly realized the most expensive mistake had not been disposing of 6 engines. It had been believing that experience inside a small country garage could never equal expertise inside a corporate headquarters. She turned back toward the room. Prepare the legal review immediately. If ownership remains with Mr. Sullivan under the executed disposal agreement, we will respect that completely. The general counsel nodded. Our preliminary review suggests the transfer documents may indeed be legally valid. Olivia accepted the answer without complaint. Then we will negotiate honestly. Back at the garage, Jack continued photographing each engine before carefully covering them once again as the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the concrete floor. He had no idea executives were discussing multi-million-dollar estimates only a few counties away. To him, the engines still represented something much simpler. They were pieces of craftsmanship deserving patience before judgment. As he closed his notebook and prepared to pick Emma up from school, a new vehicle turned off the highway toward the garage, this time carrying not only company representatives, but also the woman who had confidently declared those forgotten machines had no value at all. The black executive SUV came to a slow stop in front of Sullivan Restoration Garage, just as Jack returned from picking Emma up from school. The afternoon sun hung low above the maple trees, bathing the old workshop in warm golden light, while a gentle breeze carried the familiar scent of fresh-cut grass and motor oil across the quiet property. Emma climbed out of the pickup truck holding a small paper bag from the local bakery. "I brought your favorite cinnamon roll," she said with a smile. Jack laughed softly. "Then today is already a good day." Before they could reach the workshop door, Olivia Parker stepped out of the waiting SUV. She wore the same tailored business suit as the day before, but the confidence in her stride had been replaced by careful humility. Daniel Brooks followed behind her carrying a leather portfolio, while 2 members of the company's legal department remained respectfully beside the vehicle. Olivia walked toward Jack and stopped several feet away. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet was broken only by the distant song of birds settling into the trees. Finally, Olivia extended her hand. "Mr. Sullivan, thank you for seeing us again." Jack accepted the handshake with the same calm courtesy he offered everyone. "You are always welcome here." Olivia looked toward the row of covered engines. "I owe you an apology." Jack remained silent, allowing her to continue. Yesterday, I believed those engines had no remaining value. I judged them too quickly because I trusted incomplete information. She lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at him. You saw something that an entire corporation failed to notice. Jack smiled gently. I only saw enough to know I should not rush. Daniel carefully opened the portfolio and placed several documents on the wooden workbench. Our legal department has completed its preliminary review. Based on the signed disposal authorization, ownership may have transferred to you when the engines were delivered yesterday. Final verification is still underway, but we wanted to be transparent before discussing anything further. Jack looked at the documents without touching them. I appreciate your honesty. Olivia nodded gratefully. Regardless of the final legal determination, Parker Industrial Systems would like the opportunity to purchase the engines if you are willing. Emma quietly stood beside her father, listening without interrupting. She noticed that the woman who had spoken with absolute certainty the day before now sounded completely different. Jack looked toward the covered engines before answering. Before we discuss price, I want something more important to be clear. Olivia listened carefully. These engines deserve to be preserved correctly. They represent the work of people whose skill should never be forgotten. If they return to your company, I want written assurance they will be restored, documented, and protected instead of hidden in another warehouse. Olivia answered immediately. You have my word. Jack smiled kindly. Your word matters. Let us also put it in writing. Daniel could not help smiling. That is exactly what I hoped you would say. Olivia looked around the modest garage where every tool rested in its proper place, and every repaired machine reflected years of patient craftsmanship. She realized she had spent years measuring value through financial reports while standing inside a workshop where value was measured through respect, honesty, and time. Emma quietly handed her father the paper bag. Jack removed the cinnamon roll, broke it neatly in half, and offered one piece to Olivia without hesitation. Would you like to share? Olivia accepted it with a surprised smile. Thank you. Standing together beside 6 forgotten engines, sharing an ordinary pastry beneath the warm Ohio afternoon, Olivia understood that the greatest lesson she had learned had nothing to do with engineering. It was that true wisdom never needed to announce itself. It simply waited patiently until everyone else was finally ready to see it. 3 days later, the legal review reached its conclusion. Every document had been examined, every signature verified, and every step of the disposal process carefully reconstructed by attorneys representing both sides. The written determination was straightforward. Ownership of the 6 engines had legally transferred when Parker Industrial Systems authorized their disposal and delivered them to Sullivan Restoration Garage under the signed agreement. No shortcuts had been taken. No technicalities had been exploited. The law simply confirmed what Jack had quietly insisted upon from the very beginning. Everything would be handled the right way. Early that afternoon, Olivia Parker returned to the garage with Daniel Brooks and the company's general counsel. This time there were no hurried conversations, no assumptions, and no misplaced confidence. A polished wooden table had been placed beneath the shade of the maple trees beside the workshop, where legal documents rested neatly inside organized folders waiting for signatures. Emma sat nearby sketching one of the old engines in her notebook, while occasionally smiling toward her father. Olivia looked across the 6 carefully protected prototypes before speaking. Mr. Sullivan, the legal review is complete. Your ownership has been confirmed. Jack nodded respectfully. Thank you for verifying everything properly. The general counsel placed a purchase agreement on the table. Parker Industrial Systems would like to purchase all 6 prototype engines for $3 million. The agreement also guarantees permanent preservation, historical documentation, and public recognition of their engineering significance. Jack slowly read every page without rushing. When he finished, he looked toward Olivia. I have one additional request. Olivia answered immediately. Please tell me. Jack smiled gently. Create an apprenticeship program for young mechanics who cannot afford technical education. Let these engines help build people as well as products. Olivia did not hesitate. Done. Daniel looked pleasantly surprised. You are not asking for a higher price? Jack quietly folded the agreement. The engines are valuable because of the people who created them. The money matters less than making certain their legacy continues. Olivia felt an unexpected wave of admiration. During years of negotiations with suppliers, investors, and competitors, she had rarely met anyone who viewed success that way. She signed the agreement first, then slid it across the table. Jack carefully added his signature beneath hers. The transaction was complete. Yet no one reached immediately for the ceremonial handshake. Instead, Jack walked toward the nearest engine and gently rested one hand against its weathered steel surface. They were never just machines, he said softly. They carried the patience, imagination, and determination of the engineers who refused to give up until they built something better. I am glad they are finally going home. Olivia stepped beside him. And I am grateful someone cared enough to protect them when we forgot their worth. Emma looked up from her drawing and smiled. Daddy says old things are only forgotten if people stop listening. Olivia knelt beside her. Your father has taught all of us something much bigger than engines. As the transport crew carefully loaded each prototype onto specialized trailers using protective lifting equipment, every movement reflected the respect those machines had always deserved. Before the final truck departed, Olivia turned back toward Jack one last time. 3 days ago, I thought I was paying to remove useless scrap. Today, our company is investing $3 million to recover 6 pieces of history. But the greatest thing we found was not inside those engines. It was standing beside them all along. Jack simply smiled, raised one hand in farewell, and watched the convoy disappear down the country road, content not because of the money now resting in his business account, but because the truth had finally received the respect it had patiently waited for all those years. 1 year later, Sullivan Restoration Garage looked much the same from the outside, but the quiet little workshop had become something far greater than a place where engines were repaired. The old wooden sign still welcomed every customer driving down the country road outside Columbus, Ohio. The familiar scent of motor oil still drifted through the open garage doors, and the maple trees still cast long afternoon shadows across the gravel driveway. Yet every Saturday morning, the workshop now filled with young apprentices from small towns across the state, eager to learn skills that many believed were disappearing. The apprenticeship program Jack had requested instead of a larger payment had already changed dozens of lives. Young men and women who could never have afforded technical training now stood beside experienced mechanics, learning not only how to rebuild engines, but also how to rebuild confidence, patience, and pride in honest craftsmanship. Jack never introduced himself as the man who had once owned 6 engines worth $3 million. To every student, he was simply the mechanic who reminded them to clean their tools before putting them away and to respect every machine before deciding it could not be repaired. Emma, now 10 years old, proudly helped organize the classroom corner inside the garage, where shelves once filled with old parts now held engineering books, restored components, and photographs telling the story of American innovation through generations of skilled hands. One picture always drew the attention of new students. It showed 6 restored prototype engines displayed inside the Parker Industrial Systems Heritage Center beneath a simple bronze plaque. The inscription did not celebrate executives, investors, or profits. It read, "Preserved because one mechanic chose patience before judgment." Parker Industrial Systems had changed as well. Olivia Parker kept every promise she had made beneath the maple trees. The Orion prototypes became the centerpiece of a permanent engineering exhibit. The apprenticeship program received annual funding, and every new executive attended a leadership seminar beginning with a single lesson displayed on the opening screen. Never confuse age with worth or appearance with value. Olivia often visited the garage without cameras, reporters, or or formal announcements. She no longer arrived to give instructions. She came to listen. During one visit, she found Jack helping a nervous 16-year-old apprentice repair an old farm engine that everyone else believed belonged in a scrapyard. The teenager sighed with frustration. Maybe it is too far gone. Jack smiled gently while handing him a clean wrench. People have been saying that about machines for a long time. They have also been saying it about people. The young apprentice looked at the engine differently after hearing those words. Olivia quietly smiled because she realized the greatest lesson inside that garage had never been about mechanics. It had always been about hope. Before leaving, Emma handed Olivia a new drawing. This time it showed two people standing beside an old engine beneath a bright blue sky. One wore work boots. The other wore a business suit. Between them stood a small girl holding both of their hands. Across the top she had written, "The best things are fixed together." Olivia carefully folded the drawing and thanked her with misty eyes. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the maple trees, Jack closed the garage for another evening exactly as he had done thousands of times before. He turned off the workshop lights, locked the old wooden door, and looked back for a quiet moment before walking toward home with Emma beside him. The money had changed many lives, but it had never changed the man. His greatest treasure had never been hidden inside 6 forgotten engines. It had always been the quiet character that allowed him to see value where others saw only scrap, to choose honesty over opportunity, and to remind everyone who crossed his path that the strongest things ever built were not made of steel, but of patience, integrity, and the simple courage to look twice before deciding something or someone no longer mattered.